I worked day and night to lift my family out of struggle, but why did success arrive only after I stopped seeking validation? I spent 15 years trying to buy a smile from a father who only knew how to frown, convinced that if I just stacked enough cash on the kitchen table, the silence in our house would finally turn into music. It took losing almost everything, my health, my reputation, and my sanity, to realize that success was never going to walk through the front door until I stopped checking the peephole to see who was watching. My name is Elias, and at 34, I have finally learned that the hardest person to outrun is the insecure kid you used to be. To understand why I ended up covered in sawdust in a drafty barn, making more money than I ever did in a suit, you have to understand where I started. I grew up in a cramped, gray apartment in the city's industrial district, where the air always smelled like wet pavement and exhaust. My life was defined by the shadow of my father, Arthur. Arthur is 70 now, but back then, he was a mountain of a man who had spent 40 years driving city buses. He was hard, calloused, and silent. He viewed the world as a transaction. You work until your back breaks, you pay your bills, and then you die. There was no room for dreams in Arthur's world, only survival. My mother, Clara, 62, was the peacemaker, a woman who had mastered the art of making herself small so she wouldn't take up space in a room full of tension. Then there was my sister, Maya, 36, who had the good sense to stop caring early on. She worked as a florist, barely scraping by, but she laughed louder than anyone I knew. I, however, was the golden child. I was the one who was going to lift us out. I was the one who was going to prove to Arthur that life could be more than just survival. I decided I would become an architect. I wanted to build things that touched the sky, things so undeniable that my father would have to look up and acknowledge me. I spent my 20s in a blur of caffeine and ambition. I clawed my way into a prestigious firm in the city center. I wasn't just working, I was at war with my own background. I worked 90-hour weeks, sleeping under my desk, eating vending machine dinners, and obsessing over every line on the blueprints. I became a machine. By the time I was 32, I was a senior associate. I had the corner office with the glass walls, the German car, and the designer watch. But here is the thing about trying to fill a void with money, it's like trying to fill a black hole with water. It just disappears. I remember the day I bought my parents a house. It was a beautiful, sprawling place in the suburbs, with a garden for my mother and a garage for my father. I handed Arthur the keys, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for the moment. I wanted him to cry. I wanted him to hug me and say, "You did it, Elias. You're the man I never was." Instead, he took the keys, looked at the house, and frowned. He asked me how much the property tax was going to be. He asked if the roof was insulated properly. He walked through the empty rooms, his boots echoing on the hardwood, and said it felt too big for two old people. He didn't see a gift, he saw a burden. Have you ever poured your soul into a gesture, only to have it rejected not with anger, but with indifference? How do you keep moving when the fuel you've been running on suddenly turns into water? That rejection planted a seed of rot in my chest. I went back to the city, but the fire was gone. I was just going through the motions, driven by a desperate, toxic need to do more. If the house wasn't enough, maybe a promotion would be. If the car wasn't enough, maybe an award would be. I started taking on impossible projects. I became aggressive in meetings. I alienated my colleagues. I was drowning, and I was convinced that if I just swam harder, the shore would appear. The breaking point didn't come with a bang, it came with a whisper. I was 34, standing at the head of a mahogany boardroom table, pitching a multi-million-dollar waterfront development to a group of investors. I looked at the screen, at the rendering of the glass tower I had designed, and suddenly, it didn't look like a building. It looked like a cage. My vision blurred. My heart started hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I couldn't breathe. My hands, which were usually steady enough to draw fine lines, started shaking so violently I dropped the laser pointer. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I simply crumpled. I fell to the floor in front of the board of directors, gasping for air, convinced I was dying. I wasn't dying. It was a severe panic attack, followed by total physical burnout. My nervous system had simply decided to quit. I spent 3 days in a hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling. The firm sent flowers, but they also sent a courier to pick up my laptop. I was replaced before I was even discharged. When I got out of the hospital, I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't bear the sight of the things I had bought to prove I was successful. I felt a deep, crushing shame. I was the golden child who had rusted. I imagined Arthur's face, the validation, "I told you so, look." I couldn't face him. I did something drastic. I sold everything. The car, the watch, the furniture. I broke my lease. I took the cash and bought a dilapidated, abandoned carpentry workshop on the edge of a forgotten town 2 hours away from the city. It wasn't an investment, it was a hiding place. I moved into the small, drafty office at the back of the workshop. I had a cot, a hot plate, and silence. For the first month, I did nothing. I sat on the floor and stared at the dust motes dancing in the light. I was grieving the death of the person I thought I was supposed to be. I was 34, unemployed, single, and estranged from my family. By every metric of the world I came from, I was a loser. But slowly, the silence began to heal me. I started touching the tools left behind by the previous owner. Old chisels, rusted saws, a lathe that looked like it belonged in a museum. I picked up a piece of scrap wood, a gnarled, twisted root of an old oak tree that had probably been thrown away because it wasn't straight. I didn't have a plan. I just started sanding. I didn't draw a blueprint. I didn't think about market value. I just followed the grain of the wood. I spent days on that one piece of wood, smoothing out the rough edges but leaving the deep cracks and scars visible. I poured clear epoxy into the voids, highlighting the imperfections rather than hiding them. I made a table. It wasn't perfect. It was heavy, asymmetrical, and raw. But when I ran my hand over it, I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years, peace. What would you do if you realized that the thing you were best at was the thing that paid the least? Would you trade your status for your sanity? I spent the next 6 months in that workshop. I grew a beard. I wore flannel shirts covered in sawdust. I stopped answering my phone. I was poor, eating canned soup and bread most nights, but I was sleeping 8 hours a day. I started reclaiming wood from fallen barns and storm-damaged trees. I saw beauty in the things the world had discarded. I wasn't trying to save my family anymore. I wasn't trying to impress Arthur. I had let go of that rope. I realized that my need for his validation was a cage I had built for myself. I accepted that he might never be proud of me, and for the first time, that thought didn't cripple me. It freed me. I worked day and night, not out of fear, but out of obsession. I loved the smell of cedar. I loved the resistance of walnut. I loved the way maple looked when you applied the first coat of oil. I was creating things that had a soul. One afternoon, a woman stopped her car in front of my open bay door. She was lost, looking for directions to the highway. She stepped inside to ask for help and froze when she saw the collection of furniture I had built. "Where did you get these?" she asked, running her manicured hand over the live edge of a coffee table. "I made them," I said, wiping grease from my hands. "Just messing around with scrap." She looked at me, then back at the table. "This isn't messing around. This is honest. Everything in the city is so polished, so fake. This feels real." She bought the table on the spot. She paid me cash, 3 times what I would have asked for. It turned out she was an interior scout for high-end lofts in the city. She took photos of the rest of my work. 2 weeks later, my email, which I rarely checked, was flooded. The scout had posted the photos. People were clamoring for my authentic, reclaimed, artisan furniture. They loved the story of the architect who quit the rat race to work with his hands. It was ironic. The very thing I had done to escape the world was making the world chase me. I started selling pieces for prices that made me laugh. A dining table sold for more than my monthly salary at the architecture firm. But here was the difference. I didn't care. I wasn't doing it for the money. If nobody bought them, I would have kept making them anyway. That detachment, that lack of desperation, made the work better. It gave me a negotiation power I never had when I was begging for approval. I wasn't seeking validation, so I didn't compromise. I told clients, "It's ready when it's ready." I told them, "I pick the wood, not you." And because I didn't need them, they wanted me more. I hadn't spoken to Arthur in nearly a year. I assumed he was ashamed of me. I assumed he told the neighbors I had gone crazy. But with the influx of orders, I needed help. I needed someone who knew how to drive a truck, someone who knew how to organize a logistics schedule. I swallowed my pride and drove to my parents' house. I pulled up in my dusty pickup truck, wearing my work boots. Maya was there, sitting on the porch. She smiled when she saw me. She told me I looked human, for the first time in a decade. Arthur came out of the garage. He looked older. He saw the truck. He saw the boots. He saw the sawdust in my hair. I expected the lecture. I expected the "I told you so." "I need help, Dad," I said, keeping it simple. "I'm building furniture. It's taking off. I need someone to manage the deliveries. I can't pay you a lot yet, but..." Arthur didn't say anything. He walked over to the truck bed where I had a finished walnut bench strapped down. He ran his hand over the joint work. He looked at the dovetail corners. He looked at the way I had sanded the curve of the leg. "You made this?" he asked. His voice was gruff, but there was a crack in it. "Yeah," I said. "It's just wood." "This isn't just wood," he said quietly. "This is good work, honest work." He looked up at me, and I saw it. I finally saw it. He wasn't looking at a bank account. He wasn't looking at a suit. He was looking at craftsmanship. Arthur respected labor. He respected sweat. He didn't understand the abstract world of architecture and finance, but he understood the tangible reality of building something with your hands. "I'll drive the truck," he said. That was 2 years ago. Today, my workshop employs 10 people. Maya runs the front office and handles the clients. Arthur runs the logistics. He's 72, and he's happier than I've ever seen him. He comes into the shop every morning with coffee, critiques my sanding, and grumbles about the lumber prices, but he smiles. I realized that for years, I was speaking a language he couldn't understand. I was trying to impress him with things that meant nothing to him. But when I stopped trying to be the success, and just became myself, we found a common ground. The money is there now. The struggle is over. I paid off their mortgage, not with a lump sum from a bonus I hated earning, but with checks signed by Elias Woodworks. And this time, Arthur didn't complain about the taxes. He framed the first check. I worked day and night to save them, but I couldn't save them until I saved myself. I had to stop performing. I had to stop looking for a round of applause. Success didn't come when I chased it. It came when I sat down, did the work that mattered to me, and let the world come to find me. We spend so much of our lives screaming, "Look at me," that we forget to look at what we're actually doing. The moment I stopped seeking validation was the moment I became valid. I want to know your take. Is it possible to be truly successful if you're still doing it to prove someone else wrong? Or is true success always a solo journey of self-discovery? If this story hit home for you and made you rethink who you're living your life for, please like, share, and subscribe. Sometimes the biggest struggle we have to overcome isn't poverty or failure, it's the need to be seen. Let's stop building cages and start building lives.